Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. And for all my continued followers, I want to say thank you. And this is an opinion-based video channel where I try to open your eyes and ears to some of the travails and tribulations that take place throughout our cities, our states, our country, and sometimes around the world. And being from Chicago, Illinois, I've done several videos on some of the traumatic things that have taken place in Chicago with all the chaos and disruption. And unfortunately, this is another one. I have never been a proponent of defunding the police, but here's another tragedy where I think the police in Chicago were a little bit over exuberant in a particular traffic stop of a black civilian citizen that ended up having 96 shots fired at him, subsequently him dying from several police officers on a traffic stop because they claim he didn't have his seatbelt on. Here we go. Deadly Chicago traffic stop where police fired 96 shots raises serious questions about the use of force. A deadly traffic stop where plainclothes Chicago police officers fired nearly 100 shots in under a minute has raised serious questions about the use of force and role of tactical officers in departments. As family and community members mourn 26-year-old Dexter Reed, a police oversight agency and Cook County prosecutors are investigating. Here's a deeper look. Videos and documents released this week by the Chicago Office of Police Accountability paint a harrowing picture of what happened during the March 21st traffic stop. But about a week ago, the oversight agency's leader expressed grave concerns about the officers' actions in a letter to Police Superintendent Larry Snelling. Officers in an unmarked police car stopped Mr. Reed for not wearing a seatbelt, according to COPA, which is the Chicago Office of Police Accountability. But things developed quickly as he appeared to refuse officers' commands and did not immediately leave the SUV, according to the video. Supposedly allegedly Reed fired first, according to COPA, which is the Chicago Office of Police Accountability, leaving an officer with a wrist injury. Then 4 officers fired 96 shots in a span of 41 seconds, including after Reed exited the vehicle, fell to the ground, and lay motionless. One officer alone fired 50 shots. One officer. Based on the totality of the available evidence, COPA has grave concerns about the officer's ability to assess what is a necessary, reasonable, and proportional use of deadly force. COPA Chief Administrator Andrea Kernston wrote in an April 1st letter obtained through a records request. The American Civil Liberties Union also criticized the officer's actions, including for immediately drawing guns and making profane-laced comments at Mr. Reed. From the moment they all jumped into the vehicle to chase the car, you can feel the adrenaline rush, said ACLU of Illinois spokesman Ed Yanka. There were no efforts to de-escalate. Now, who are the officers? The officers are on 30-day administrative leave during investigations by COPA and the Cook County State's Attorney. In her letter, Kirsten recommended reevaluating the 4 officers assigned and relieving them of police powers during the investigation. State's Attorney Kim Foxx said her office was investigating the possibility of criminal charges. The officers were part of a district tactical unit, according to COPA. Chicago police say tactical officers have been part of each district's patrol for years. They're generally sent to areas with high crime patterns, working in uniform and sometimes in street clothes. Earlier this year, Snelling halted a similar citywide unit formed during unrest in 2020 that came under fire for sending officers into unfamiliar police districts, among other things. Elsewhere in the country, elite units of plainclothes officers have faced scrutiny, particularly following the beating and death of Tyree Nichols in Memphis. While police say such units can respond to increased crime, advocates have called out aggressive tactics and traffic stops to search for larger crimes. Chicago has been under a far-reaching plan for court-supervised reforms since 2019. The U.S. Justice Department has found a long history of racial bias and excessive use of force after police killed teenager Laquan McDonald. Chicago police have declined to comment on the investigation. So what happened in the stop? Doubts have been raised about whether there was a seatbelt violation that led to the stop. Experts question tactical officers' involvement. Why would a police officer, not in uniform, bother with something like that? Asked Jeffrey Alpert, a researcher at the University of South Carolina specializing in high-risk police activities. Reed's SUV had dark tinted windows, making it difficult for officers to see inside, Kirsten noted in her letter. The available evidence calls into question the veracity of this account, Kirsten wrote to Snelling. Reed's family members were also skeptical. If he was supposedly pulled over for a traffic stop, why did they have 4 guns pointed at him? Reed's sister, Portia Banks, told reporters after the videos were released. He was scared. Meanwhile, the ACLU pointed to an alarming rise in Chicago traffic stops, which disproportionately affect Black and Latino drivers. Chicago police reported fewer than 100,000 traffic stops in 2015, compared with more than 500,000 last year. 100,000 traffic stops in 2015 and 500,000 in the last year. Look at that uptick, according to advocacy group Impact for Equity. The investigation. The key to the deadly force investigation will be determining the threat to officers' lives. Policing experts raise eyebrows over the number of shots, including after Reed was on the ground. All 96 shots need to be accounted for. That means, why were they fired? Alpert said. The only reason you can fire is if this guy is creating an imminent threat. The videos don't show Reed firing a gun. They do not show him firing a gun. Police later found a weapon on the passenger side seat of his vehicle. Footage from body-worn cameras offer glimpses into the confusing and distressing situation, including an officer who applied a tourniquet to a bleeding colleague. They don't know what they're walking into half the time, said Ryan Tobaz, a psychologist who heads a forensic mental health program at Adler University in Chicago. They may be highly suspicious, on guard, hypervigilant, he said. Some of them will have a high startle response. The police union blamed COPA for pitting the community against police. Chicago Fraternal Order of Police President John Canizares said officers responded heroically against someone who shot an officer. It turned into much more, not because of the officers, he said in the video statement last week. What an incredible story. Just think if that was your son, your brother, your father. It starts off as a traffic stop for him not wearing his seatbelt. This is a 26-year-old young man. I'm coming to you straight out of St. Louis, and I'm from Chicago. Have a place there. Most young people have tinted windows. There used to be a law where you couldn't have extreme tint to where officers or people couldn't look into the car. That has changed with the advent of these liberal laws that we have nowadays. It is very hard for an officer to look through a tinted window to see if somebody has a seatbelt on, especially if they're driving. And many traffic stops here in St. Louis and Chicago, as soon as you get stopped, they want you to roll your window down so they can see into your vehicle and have your hands on the steering wheel or outside of the window. So for all of that we know as a historical perspective on how to handle a traffic stop as a police officer and also as a citizen of America, how did it end up with this gentleman being shot at over 100 times over a seatbelt? We're seeing heavy patterns historically, and even in today's time, after Black Lives Matter protests, after a lot of civil unrest as a result of white officers killing black citizens, in particularly black males. And you have this scenario here where it seems like there was an overexuberance, there was a rush to judgment. There is controversy over whether he made a shot at the police officers, or if he shot at the police officers, or did they just start hailing bullets at him, at Mr. Reed. The officer that got wounded, got shot in the wrist. How do we know it didn't come from one of the other police officers? They shot at this gentleman, Mr. Reed, 100 times, 96 times. There are bullets flying all over the place. Thank God there weren't other civilians and citizens that were nearby, because they could have had gotten shot and been an ancillary casualty of this particular traffic stop. Police officers in Chicago and many of our major cities have more to worry about than somebody driving around without a seatbelt. And for it to end with this gentleman, Dexter Reed, 26 years old, with his whole life in front of him, to end by the police shooting and killing him, we better hope that the police check all the boxes off, dot every I and every T to make sure they were in the right and that their lives were in danger. If that's not the case, we have another scenario of white cops doing too much and going beyond the realms and the guidelines of the law for a traffic stop to end up killing another young black civilian. We have to get to a place where the citizens of America in many of our metropolitan areas can have a symbiotic relationship with our police departments and our public safety. There is so much chaos and disruption that's going on throughout our major cities that this is an unfortunate light. And there's so much going on in Chicago with the migrant crisis. 50% of the commercial real estate in downtown Chicago loop is vacant. There is a heavy burden that's been placed on Chicago for many, many years. The gang violence, the gun violence, the opioid crisis, the homelessness, the carjackings, armed robberies. There are tons of things that are going on. And I think that these particular non-uniformed officers, this tactical unit, should be out observing and taking care of more serious crimes and stopping this young man for not wearing a seatbelt. And how could you even see that with dark tinted windows and him driving down the street? Uh, it doesn't make an ounce of sense. So for this alleged scenario of shooting at this gentleman 96 times as if they were in some kind of third world war, is beyond measures. We have to pray for Mr. Reed's family, his parents, his brothers and sisters. This is another unfortunate circumstance and puts a black eye on our policing. The Chicago police force has had many decades of deleterious behavior, detrimental behavior, unlawful behavior, and overexuberance to arrest, to gain convictions against many of the poor citizens in Chicago. But on the flip side of it, for policing, it is a very, very tough job. Every day that you leave your house, you're putting your life on the line. It's always a high stress, high anxiety situation. Chicago is down about 1,000 police officers. They need more police officers. This does not help and aid at increasing the number of people wanting to enter the police academy. This also affects Chicago's tourism. This uptick in violence, in gun violence, in violence citizen against citizen, the gang violence, police brutality, all of that sheds a terrible light on the city of Chicago, which is close to my heart. Chicago is one of the great cities of America. You have the Chicago Board of Trade. You have a lot of things that you can garner and take advantage of. There's been a ton of famous people to come out of Chicago. Chicago is in the center of the United States of America, in the Midwest, and it should be a focal point of positivity and progress. But we continuously are having these stories where police have a tendency, especially dealing with citizens of color, to be reactionary, to be negative, to have a certain arrogance, and are willing to commit deadly force against citizens of color by any means necessary. We don't hear a whole lot of stories on simple traffic stops, or any of these other kinds of situations where they are shooting white male citizens or white female citizens in America. Why do we have the pendulum swung so much one way to this kind of heinous, above the law kind of mentality and activity towards people of color? We have to have a scenario where we have a healthy citizenship with each other, and we need to have a symbiotic, healthy relationship with our public safety officials. And this, again, is something that's very unfortunate that took place in Chicago. This tactical unit went after this black guy, 26 years old, allegedly, and shot at him 96 times. He ended up dying, of course, from the wounds. And now there's going to be a huge investigation that this is the last thing that the city of Chicago and the government officials need to be worried about. And this is taking all of the energy away from the migrant issue, from the poverty-stricken areas in Chicago. Chicago is the third or fourth largest city in America. And for this circumstance to happen, and it's happening repeatedly over and over again, it makes you wonder, what do we need to do to better vet our police officers, to increase people wanting to join the academy, increase their salaries. They are putting their lives on the line all the time. Every time they make a stop, it can go one way or the other. We need to defend our police departments, but we cannot defend them when we have bad apples and bad seeds that are committing crimes just like the average criminal. Tell me what you think. This has been the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth in a positive, righteous, and God-fearing way.